People who have had a creepy feeling about someone come true. What happened? Not me, but my cousin. She was on an overnight Greyhound bus and a man got on and many of the seats were full. He walked towards the open seat next to her and looked as if he were going to sit there, and my cousin goes, "You can't sit here." Usually a very open and friendly person, she kind of thought to herself, wow, that was bitchy of me, but she had a bad feeling about him. So the man finds another seat and my cousin falls asleep. A little while later she wakes up to the bus pulled over to the side of the road and police cars outside. The police come onto the bus and arrest the man who wanted to sit with my cousin. He had found another woman to sit with and assaulted her. My ex-boyfriend's dad always gave me the creeps. Nothing in particular, just a really bad vibe. Broke up with that ex about 8 years ago. I saw in the paper recently his dad got arrested for rape. The girl told her mom when she was 13. Had been assaulting her since she was 5. Freaking horrifying. Same happened with my ex-husband. His father gave me the creeps and I just genuinely did not like the guy for no reason. He once stayed with us for a week and I eventually gave the ultimatum that either he had to leave or I would. Was a fricked up day when the phone rang to tell us to look in the paper. Turns out he was charged with elder rape. Back when I was in high school, some new kid joined. Only really interacted with him on the football field, but he really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not a small guy. I'm big enough to fend for myself, so while he creeped me out, I wasn't really scared of him. I should have been. But ego gets in the way when you're a teenager. All of a sudden, he tries to injure me in discreet ways while playing football, like stamping on my ankle, tripping me up while none of us had the ball, nobody was looking, etc. After a couple more incidents he stepped it up a lot. He ended up stabbing me in the face while I was reading a book. We don't know if he meant to murder me or seriously maim me, but he punched me 3 times with a sharpened key in his fist. 2 of the blows got deflected by my glasses, which left a giant mark on the lenses and where my temple was. Sometimes you feel off about someone but they don't look like they can really threaten you too much, but in reality they can and will. In college I worked at a bar and they brought in this new bouncer. From the second I met him I immediately felt like there was something seriously wrong with him. His smile and eye contact were too intense. I told a co-worker that the guy gave me the creeps and she told me she thought he was cute and nice and didn't get where I was coming from. A quick Google search pulled up his mugshot and articles about how he was watching his college roommate's dog one weekend and horribly attacked and abused it. He burned this poor dog and poured bleach on her. She thankfully survived and he was arrested. The article talked about how he was laughing at the police arresting him, saying he knows he won't get in any trouble. He was fired and told to never come back once management found out. Not me, but my mom. My sister was going to visit her friend out of state, so her friend's friend offered to drive her there. He drove a few hours to get to our house and was noticeably tired when he arrived, so my sister suggested that he just sleep on our couch and they'll go in the morning. The entire night, my mom's going in and out of our rooms saying that there's something off about the guy, that she doesn't really like him but can't figure out why. She actually quietly went out the side door and wrote down his license plate at one point. The next morning my sister's in his car for maybe 30 minutes before she feels sick and asks him to just take her home, which he does, much to my mother's delight. About 6 months later my mom's looking at her newsfeed when she sees a familiar face and calls my sister and I over and yells, "I told you something was off about him." Turns out that about a year earlier he murdered his ex-girlfriend and that his friend, who helped him bury her body, finally decided to tell the cops, not because he developed a conscience, but because he was mad at him for stealing his toaster. There was a guy interested in dating my mom years ago. She wasn't interested. Something seemed off. He was also interested in dating 2 of her other friends. All 3 had young daughters. Shortly after this we moved away, and he started dating one of the friends. They stayed with us at a weekend music festival, and the girl wanted to stay in the trailer that our family had rented, so we let her. I'll always be grateful we did, because it kept her away from that creep. We found out he was abusing her shortly before we heard that he died in a car accident. Good riddance. Met this guy on a night out. He was new to the area and friends with my friend's brother. He came across as nice and friendly, but then he started being a bit strange, like he kept rubbing my back and touching my legs. We all went back to my friend's house and I was pretty drunk, but this guy kept trying to get me to leave with him without anyone seeing. I told everyone something was weird about him. Turned out he had been charged with ARPing a 10-year-old and that's why he had left his previous city. He had assaulted a 13-year-old a few weeks before he met me and the police found he was in possession of a lot of CP. My mum and I were in a cafe and she had her handbag down by her feet. This couple comes in and sits at the table behind us, and he attracted my attention because he kept poking his GF, telling her how to sit and stuff and just, the hairs on my neck went up. I hate that controlling BS. So he's in my periphery and this guy won't sit still when my mum says, hey, where's my bag? She finds it a second later, moved and open. She reached in to get her purse and said my card has gone. So the couple behind had stood and were walking at speed towards the door and I didn't even hesitate stop that man because I figured I could apologize later if I was wrong. One of the waitresses was right by the door and she followed him out the door, at which point the guy dropped my mum's card, mumbled something about having found it and then ran for it. I guess if he hasn't been such an ass to his GF I probably wouldn't have noticed. A tennis coach at my kids' club called to ask me if he could take my 10-year-old daughter with the other 5 players on local road trips to play other clubs. I didn't like it. She was tiny and 10. I said no. He ended up in prison for being a child predator and groping several girls older than my kid. A close call. He was a friend of mine. Nicest guy you could ever meet. He would go out of his way to do things for people. Something about him always gave me the slightest weird feeling. Though, we messaged at least once a day, and then all of a sudden, I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. Turns out he was busted in a Craigslist sting for soliciting a minor for sex. Always had a creepy feeling about my stepdad growing up. Never liked him one bit. Turned out he was a pathological liar. Lied about having cancer to get my family's sympathy. Embezzled money from my mom's business to gamble. Real crap bag of a human being. Kid sense dirt. Around middle school I started getting creeped out by my father. He wouldn't even do anything you could point to and say that right there. That's it. But you just got the feeling he was like a spider. Watching and waiting. Something lurking and dangerous. He began running with a group called Scam the Scammers, where they'd make scammers do ridiculous things. It was all in good fun because they deserved it. Humiliating, sometimes painful things. Teachers wouldn't call home to discuss anything we did, positive or negative. There were notes in my file to only discuss things with my mother, no matter what. He started to become obsessed with conspiracy theories. Obama was a Kenyan Muslim. My mother was cheating on him with a woman and 3 men. All sorts of things. You got the feeling something was wearing my father as a skin suit. That's the best way I can describe it. Turns out he has an inoperable brain tumor. He's permanently changed. My father is alive, but he's no longer my dad. Went to school with this guy since about 4th grade. He was a bully and made sure I knew that I wasn't liked as he used an old doll and named it after me and beat it up with his friends. He always had a weird creepy vibe, which got worse in high school. He and his friends were a lot nicer to me in high school, but I stayed away as much as I could as he made me uncomfortable. About a year after we graduated he was arrested for following an underage girl and groping her near her school when she was on lunch break. His friends have since cut off contact. Not sure what's happened to him, but he always creeped me out. When I was trying to get my mental health back on track I went to see this psychiatrist who just gave me a super creepy vibe the minute I saw him, but was such a good psychiatrist I decided to ignore it. My gut feeling was correct when about 4-5 months into me seeing him he was arrested for having 10,000 plus unsolicited photos of patients' feet, them sitting on his couch that I've sat on. It sucks opening up to someone so much and having something like this happen, especially in this type of work. Got a bad vibe from the dad across the street when I was a kid. Military guy who always seemed to be on a power trip. His oldest son and I went to the same school and would occasionally carpool. One day it was his dad's turn to drive us. His son stayed home sick, but he offered to drive me all the same. Thankfully it wasn't a long ride, but the entire time he talked about his beat up Camaro. Definitely creeped me out. Fast forward a couple years. His wife threw him out one morning. Turns out he had been beating the crap out of her for a while. One morning while hitting her again, he stepped on their 1 new baby who was crawling on the floor and broke the kid's arm. Never saw him again after that. I worked in a fast food restaurant from 14-16. The lovely old couple sold it to a younger couple, and I got the creeps around the husband from day one. Tried to ignore it, just get on with work, but the first time we were working just the two of us, he followed me into the walk-in freezer and groped me. I learned to pay attention to my radar after that. There was this guy that one of my friends at church was dating at the time. I really just felt something dark when I was around him. They eventually married but divorced later on. It turns out that feeling was because this guy is a legit serial killer. Initially, he confessed to I think 3 murders. The police now believe he is responsible for at least 10 within 200 miles of our small town. My best friend's boyfriend about 2 years ago gave me weird as frick vibes. He just seemed sketchy. Not quite sure why. He wasn't by any means a bad apple, but something seemed off about him. Fast forward to May last year and we found out he groped a 13-year-old in a cinema. So he was a bad apple. There was a kid who always weirded me out in school. Nothing major, but he looked at girls too long and never when they looked at him. When I was in 8th grade, he told my girlfriend that he wondered what she tasted like and wanted to touch her skin. I threatened him if he didn't leave her be. I saw his name on a sex offender registry last year when I was helping my mom search for property details. Anyone who talks about a stranger's skin creeps me out tbh. Stop looking at my organs. Guy in high school always gave me the creeps but I could never figure out why. 6 months later they find a rifle in his locker at school and that he called in bomb threats. This was before any of the school shootings happened in the US, so at the time it didn't really think that much of it. Now it totally freaks me out. I just looked him up and there is an entire Reddit thread about him. He's now a neo-Nazi and possible murderer. When I was 19 I worked at a local restaurant. I loved working there but I ended up quitting because of some douchebag that was hired. He was in his mid-30s and gave every girl in the restaurant the absolute creepiest vibes. He was constantly saying inappropriate stuff about his past and was just a butthole to people in general. I hated working with him because he creeped me out and was also just mean. I started trading shifts to get away from him. One day a night shift manager was fired and our boss put creepy guy in a temporary manager position. I immediately went to our boss and told him I was uncomfortable with the idea and explained how creepy he was. My boss leveled with me and said that the douchebag had no actual manager power and was just temporary until he found someone else. He was just there to run shifts. My boss arranged it so my schedule never crossed over with the creep. One day a co-worker of mine got sick and I was asked to cover her shift. I get there and creep is managing. I thought I could deal with one night but a friend of mine called the store sobbing. She had tried to call my cell around 100 times but it was in my purse. She was crying hysterically and told me she had been up ahead and didn't know what to do or where to go but that she was horrified and too scared to leave. I told my friend I would be right there and told douchebag I had an emergency and would be leaving. It was a slow night and I wasn't needed anyway but he freaked out and tried to physically stop me, demanding to know my emergency. I tried to sidestep it but eventually told him my friend had been up ahead. He burst out laughing in my face and told me that was hilarious and not an excuse to leave. I told him to go to heck and shoved past him. He told me I couldn't leave and I said watch me. I went outside and burst into tears and called my boss and told him I quit after explaining what happened. A few months later I was working at my new job and a former co-worker came in and said they had some news for me. Apparently 2 police officers showed up at my old workplace and served papers to douchebag. He had been stalking a girl for the last 5 years and it started when she was 14/15. He had also assaulted her. I always had a weird feeling about my stepdad. He always made me uncomfortable and I always felt like he was watching me. He would make comments about my body and wardrobe causing me to feel insecure and watch what I wore around him. When I told my mom she would say things like he's old-fashioned or he's just looking out for you. My mom had gone out of the country to visit family leaving my stepdad, myself and my older brother to take care of the house. One night my brother went to a party and I stayed home because I worked early the next morning, but left my bedroom door open so I could hear my brother come home and make sure he made it safe. Instead my stepdad decided to crawl into my bed and try to pay me. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I pushed him off and ran to the bathroom. I was so freaked out I just grabbed my work clothes and went to my car and drove off to a random neighborhood and slept in my car. My mom found out a year later because I told my older brother, but she's never talked to me about it. She's still with him too. As for me, I am in therapy to deal with my trauma and I feel like I'm getting better. A year ago I wouldn't even be able to type this all out. I had a former friend who got married after she divorced her second husband. Initially I thought I was uncomfortable around him because I take a while to warm up to people. We sort of drifted apart. Easily done. Since they lived 1.5 hours away. About a year after I had my daughter I ran into him at a bookstore parking lot. He looked at her through the window and made me very uncomfortable with the way he was acting. I quickly made an excuse to leave, called my husband and told him that neither he nor his wife were to ever be around our house or family again. Less than a year later, both of them were arrested for sexual abuse of her children. It still makes me sick to even think about them. I worked for a call center a few years ago and there was a guy that sat at the desk across from me. He was about 45-50 and was not married. I'm young enough to be his daughter. He would do anything to talk to me, come by my desk, run into me in the break room, get in the elevator with me, etc. It was excessive, but never threatening. At first, he started to say inappropriate things about my outfits. I never wore anything overly provocative, but I figured he was an awkward dude that did not know how to flirt. I just brushed him off time and time again, but something was definitely off about him. At one point, the secretary came up to me and asked if he was bothering me, and I told her what had been happening. Turns out, he did this with only blonde women at the office. He was notorious for harassing them. It started small, but then he would slowly transition into asking them for intercourse, or offering to pay for it. Knowing this, I avoided him altogether. I would pretend he was not there, even if he was talking to me directly. I would catch him staring at me, but he backed down a lot after he realized that I wouldn't give in. One day, I came into work, and he was gone. Desk was cleared off. Totally empty. He apparently had sent another blonde woman a bunch of flowers and followed her out to the parking lot when she got off work. He had parked his car right next to hers and tried to force her into his car to go home with him, but she got away. He was fired and escorted off the property the next day by police. I'm not sure why he decided to come back, or why he wasn't arrested sooner, but he was caught at work and removed. Nothing too eventful, but it is scary knowing that it could have been me that he forced into his car. Dude couch surfing at my son's apartment had a very twitchy vibe like an addict hurting for a fix. I asked my son, oh no, he hates drugs. He just has like arthritis or something. He borrowed my son's car, got his fix, crashed the car, said he had got carjacked. We reported the car stolen. 2 days later he OD'd in my son's apartment. My son found him and the EMS guys saved him. My son realized he had issues and started looking for Medicaid rehab space. Dude OD'd again on the couch. EMS saved him again. Narcan is magic. We went to the hospital, told him he could not come back and to text my son where he wanted his crap dropped off. We dropped it off at his grandmother's house. Poor grandma. Our bin man always looked creepy and scary. I always avoided him. Fast forward 5 years, he is found with hordes of child abuse pictures, videos on his laptops and 11 years jail time. This happens way too much and I hate it. I'm a graveyard shift cashier and hate it when getting a skeevy feeling from someone for no reason once they walk in, because my urge is to sweep away unfounded suspicions. But then that person inevitably runs out the door with merch and makes me regret doubting myself. A neighborhood kid I grew up with liked to play with matches and was fascinated with fires of any kind. It made me nervous because a sort of wild look came over his eyes when he'd stare at the fire he created. I even told my parents, who mentioned it to his parents, who thought it was just a phase he was going through. Then, a few years later, it was reported that he burned his parents' garage down and was being charged with arson and clinically treated for pyromania. When I used to work at a deli, we hired a 20-something kid that looked like the serial killer, Ed Kemper, son the mustache. At first, he would amuse us by telling us stories about how he had fought off 8 guys with weapons, or how his girlfriend was a model who traveled all the time, and that is why we never saw her. Then things started getting bad, especially when someone angered him. I would catch him talking to himself, saying things like, "If I see that bee again I am going to stick this in both her eyes," Management got wind of this and canned his butt immediately. 10 months later, we find out he actually went to prison for attempting to assault someone with a knife. My brother-in-law. He and my sister-in-law lived across country and I had never met him. They had only been married for a short time. They came for a visit. He just gave me the creeps. When there's something off, you just know sometimes. It's hard to explain. It's little things. For example, at family stuff, he would be playing with the little kids while the other guys drank beer and watched sports. One day I got a frantic call at work from my wife that he was arrested and their kids were taken into state custody. He was alone at home with the kids when the police came. You guessed it, CP. There were signs that he abused his own kids but there wasn't enough evidence. My kids were never alone with him, ever. He got 20 years if I remember correctly. I used to work with a gentleman a while back who was really nice, but gave off something like a dominant vibe to a certain extent. After he had left for a new job, we never kept contact, but I could see his and his wife's social media. They were the picture perfect family with 2 daughters with another on the way, always smiling, going on trips and just enjoying life as a unit. One morning I wake up and see that the wife and kids are missing with the husband giving a come back home plea to the news. So at this point it's becoming a big deal. Next morning upon waking up, I see headlines everywhere reading father confesses to murdering wife and daughters. I was so young that I don't remember, but my dad has told me this story. My uncle had a roommate when I was about 3 years old. He was apparently a pretty nice dude on the surface, friendly and didn't at all appear creepy to my dad or uncle that he lived with. Once, my dad and uncle expressed wanting to go somewhere that wasn't appropriate for me and the guy offered to babysit. I was a very sweet and quiet kid, but upon my dad saying he'd be back in a little bit and I was going to stay with this man for a few hours, I apparently threw an absolute crap fit, kicking, screaming, refusing, and even at 3 this was absolutely not normal behavior. My dad was really confused but changed his mind and did not leave me with him. Who only weeks later my uncle discovered he had a history of prison time for CP possession and attempted kidnapping. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.